Calvin wakes up while it's still dark outside. His small room behind the kitchen is quiet. He lies in his crib and stares at the ceiling. He's not crying, he's just listening. He can hear water running behind the wall. Then he hears quiet footsteps. It's his mother, Naomi. Calvin turns his head toward the sound. He says, "Uh-huh?" His mother doesn't answer. She's busy. Naomi is in the next room. She doesn't turn on the bright light so as not to wake her son. She got up very early. She's getting ready for work. In the dark, she irons her uniform, a dress and a white blouse. The steam from the iron rises in a warm cloud. Naomi thinks about the day. She has a lot to accomplish. And most importantly, don't make any noise. Calvin hears a familiar sound, the rustling of fabric. He knows what it means. Mom's seen will be here soon. He starts kicking his legs. He kicks them on the crib. He calls louder. Naomi hears. She smiles. She hangs up her blouse and goes into her son's room. She leans over the crib. Her face appears in front of Calvin. She has fluffy blonde hair. "Good morning, my dear," she whispers. Calvin immediately calms down. He smiles at his mother. He reaches out to her. Naomi takes him. She holds her son close. She smells him. It's a sweet baby scent. She stands like that for a minute. This is their quiet moment before the workday. An hour passes. The room is already light. Calvin has been fed. He is dressed in a clean blue jumpsuit. Naomi is packing her bag. Diapers, wipes, a change of clothes, a stuffed yellow giraffe. She puts everything away quickly and precisely. She's ready too. Her hair is done up. Her face is calm. But when she looks at her son, there's sadness in her eyes. "Come on," Naomi says, lifting Calvin up. They leave their room. The hallway in the house is large and empty. Their footsteps are muffled by the carpet. Naomi carries her son to the back door. There is the door to Mrs. Elsie's room. Mrs. Elsie is an elderly neighbor. She looks after Calvin while Naomi works. Her door is always ajar. Naomi comes in. The small living room smells of tea and cookies. It also smells of medicine. Mrs. Elsie is sitting in a chair. She's waiting. "Good morning," says the old woman. "Good morning, baby." "Good morning," Naomi replies. "Thank you." She spreads a blanket on the floor. It has stars painted on it. She puts the toy down. Then she lowers Calvin onto the blanket. The boy picks up the giraffe and puts it in his mouth. Naomi squats down in front of him. She straightens his overalls. "Be a good boy," she says. Her voice is even, but her insides clench. "Mom will be back soon." She kisses her son on the head. Then she quickly gets up. She can't delay. Her heart aches as it always does. She feels like she's leaving him, and she feels guilty. Guilt for not being able to be with him all day. "See you later," she says to Mrs. Elsie and walks out. She doesn't look back. If she does, it will be hard for her to leave. The door closes. Calvin is lying on the blanket. He is chewing on a giraffe leg. He heard the door close. He freezes. Mom's scent is still there, but there are no Mom's footsteps. His face wrinkles. He is close to tears. But Mrs. Elsie begins to hum softly. Calvin listens. He calms down. He rolls over onto his tummy. Another couple of hours pass. Calvin is bored. He's seen everything. Mrs. Elsie is dozing in a chair. The room is bright from the sun. A beam of light falls from the window. It hits a glass vase. A sunbeam jumps from the vase onto the wall. Calvin looks up. He sees this movement. His eyes follow the spot of light. The sunbeam jumps along the wall. Then it descends to the floor. It ends up on the parquet floor in the hallway. The parquet floor in Jean's house always gleams. It's specially polished. It glistens like ice. A ray of sunlight hits this gleam, creating a bright, sparkling spot. Calvin freezes. He's never seen anything so beautiful. He really wants to touch this light. He pushes himself up on his arms. He can already crawl a little, but forward is difficult. He mostly crawls backward. But this light, it's right there, nearby, 2 steps away, in the doorway. The door to the corridor is open. Calvin drops to his elbows. He pushes off with his foot. His body shifts sideways. He frowns. He tries again. This time it works a little better. He crawls to the edge of the blanket. His toes touch the floor. The floor is cold and smooth, not at all like the blanket. Calvin runs his hand over it. He likes it. He pushes off again and slides off the blanket. Now he's completely on the parquet floor. A sunbeam plays before him. Calvin reaches for it. He moves awkwardly, but he moves forward. A hand, a kick, another hand. It's slow, but the light is getting closer. The hallway is long. High walls, paintings. Calvin doesn't notice any of it. He sees only the light on the floor. A sunbeam guides him forward. He's already far from the room. It's very quiet here. You can't hear Mrs. Elsie or the clock. All you can hear is his breathing. He stops to rest. He rests his cheek on the parquet floor. From here, everything seems enormous. The chair legs are like trees. He sees his reflection in the shiny floor. A blurry spot. He pokes it with his finger. The spot blurs, but the sunbeam moves on. Calvin crawls again. His arms and knees are tired, but he wants to catch up with the light. He crawls past closed doors, past a large mirror. He doesn't look around. His goal is ahead. The hallway widens. It's now a foyer. The parquet flooring is laid in a pattern. The sunbeam is brighter and larger here. It bounces across the wooden squares. Calvin follows it straight to the center of the house. A sunbeam reaches the wall. It climbs up the dark door and disappears. Calvin stops. He looks at the spot where the light had just been. There's nothing there now, just a large door. He sits down. He is disappointed, but his eyes are already scanning the door. The door is large and dark. The handle is a shiny ball. This door is always closed. Always. That's the rule, but today the door isn't completely closed. There's a tiny gap between the door and the frame. A tiny one, about the width of a finger. A cool breeze wafts through the crack, and a strange smell wafts through. The smell of leather and wood. Calvin crawls closer. He presses his face to the crack. He tries to peer inside, but sees only darkness. His fingers find a crack. He scratches at the wood. Curiosity grows. He braces his hands against the door. The door doesn't move. It's very heavy. Calvin crawls away. He looks at the crack below, near the floor. He is small and thin. He crawls again. He puts his shoulder to the crack. He tries to stick his head through. It doesn't work. He pushes his feet against the floor, groaning. His blonde curls crumple. And suddenly, his head goes through. Then his shoulders slip. One more effort, and his whole body is on the other side of the door. At first, he simply lies on the floor and breathes. The room is very quiet. The air is different. It smells of books, leather, wax, and also of some kind of sharp, clean scent. Calvin looks up. He's in a large room. The tall windows are curtained. The light is dim. In the center stands a huge desk. Behind the desk is a large leather chair. It's turned upside down. Bookcases line the walls. A painting with dark spots hangs on the wall. Nothing bright, nothing soft. Everything is stern and alien. Calvin isn't afraid. He's curious. Everything here is different from his home. He crawls forward toward the table. He crawls up to it and looks up. The table is very high. On the table are papers, a computer, and a heavy stone ashtray. But Calvin is drawn to the space under the table. It's dimly lit and cozy. He crawls under the table. It smells of dust and wood. And then he sees another ashtray on the floor. It's round, metal. It's cold. Calvin touches it. It's smooth. He grabs it with both hands. It's heavy, but he lifts it. The metal is cold in his hands. He sits down under the table. He hugs his new find. He taps it with his finger. The sound is soft and clear. He likes it. He twirls the ashtray in his hands. He's already forgotten about the sunbeam. He's forgotten about the long journey. He has a new toy in a new world. He's happy. He doesn't know that his quiet adventure is about to end. Calvin sits under the table. His new world is the space between four thick wooden legs. Almost no light penetrates here. It's cool and quiet. A metal ashtray rests on his lap. It's round and heavy. Its surface is perfectly smooth, polished to a mirror shine even here in the dust. He runs his palm over it. The coolness tickles his skin pleasantly. He turns the ashtray over. The bottom is also smooth. He tries to grab it with one hand, but he can't hold on. It slips and falls onto his foot. It doesn't hurt, but it's noticeable. Calvin frowns. He picks it up again, this time with both hands, gripping it tightly. He holds it up to his face. His reflection in the concave surface distorts into a funny face. Enormous eyes, a stretched mouth. Calvin blinks in surprise. He wiggles his eyebrows. The face on the metal moves too. He sticks out his tongue, and a tongue appears in the reflection. It's funny. He mutters something quietly under his breath, talking to his distorted double. He taps the ashtray on the floor. A dull, soft thud. He likes the sound. He taps harder. Now the sound is louder, with a metallic echo. The ashtray is the best toy he's ever had. It doesn't squeak or rattle its beads. It's serious, heavy, and real, like everything in this room. And it's his now. He presses it to his chest, hugging the cold metal. He feels like a pioneer in a cave beneath a huge wooden mountain. He wants to see what happens if he throws it. He already knows how to throw his soft dice. But this thing is different. Calvin rocks back and forth. He swings the ashtray, holding it with both hands. He doesn't aim, he just lets it fall. The ashtray falls on its edge, not flat. The sound reverberates through the quiet room like a gunshot. It's not just a thud, it's a loud, sharp, clanking impact of metal against hard wood. The sound hangs in the air for a long time, trembling, and then fades. The ashtray roars across the perfectly smooth parquet floor, describing a wide arc, and comes to a stop in the middle of the room, far from the table. Calvin flinches in surprise. He wasn't expecting such thunder. He freezes, listening to the echo. His heart beats faster. He doesn't cry, but his eyes grow wide. He looks at the ashtray, now lying in the beam of light. It's not his anymore. It's escaped, and announced itself loudly to the whole world. The silence that follows this roar seems even denser and more tense. The air seems frozen in anticipation. Calvin sits motionless under the table. He instinctively senses that something is about to happen. He's made too much noise. A minute passes, maybe two. Then, from outside, in the hallway, quick, firm footsteps are heard. They're not running, they're walking determinedly and quickly. The steps approach the office door, the handle turns. The door opens not abruptly, but smoothly, yet decisively. Gene is standing at the threshold. He's wearing dark pants and a simple black t-shirt. He must have been somewhere else in the house. His square, masculine face is tense. His brows are drawn together. His gaze, sharp as a blade, instantly scans the room. He's searching for the source of the noise. His eyes glide over the table, the chair, the books on the shelves. Nothing has moved. Then his gaze falls on the metal ashtray lying in the center of the room, far from its rightful place. He stares at it for a few seconds. His face doesn't change. Then his eyes slowly, inexorably, move along an imaginary trajectory from the ashtray to the desk, to the place from which it could have rolled. He looks under the table. At first, Jin sees only the darkness beneath the tabletop. Then his eyes adjust to the dim light, and he notices them. Two large round spots, reflecting the faint light from the room. Those are eyes. Then he makes out the oval of a face, a small dark-skinned face, and those huge brown eyes, staring straight at him, unblinking. There's no fear in them, no panic, not even much surprise. There's only pure, unadulterated curiosity. The child studies it the same way he studied the ashtray a moment ago. Jin freezes. He doesn't move. He just stares at those eyes staring at him from beneath his own desk. His mind races. A thief? Impossible. Someone's child? How did he get here? His people were supposed to prevent this. The familiar wave of anger surges through him, at the disruption of order, at the invasion of his privacy. But he doesn't move, because those eyes, they don't look like a threat. They look like an apparition. Jin slowly, very slowly, closes the door behind him. The click of the lock sounds incredibly loud. Now they are alone in the room, he and the intruder. He doesn't call security. He doesn't shout. He takes one step forward, then another. He moves closer to the table. He stops a few steps away. Then, maintaining eye contact with those large eyes, he slowly squats down. His movements are fluid, almost unnatural for his large, usually ramrod-like frame. He lowers himself to be level with the child. Now he can see him completely. A little boy, dressed in blue overalls, socks on his feet, light, fluffy curls, like a halo around his head. The boy sits with his legs tucked under him, holding his knees in his hands. He simply stares. Jin looks back. He studies her features, chubby cheeks, a serious look, a trace of drool on her chin. And then Calvin makes a move. His mouth, which had been pursed in concentration, begins to stretch. The corners of his lips begin to curl upward. It's slow but sure, and a wide, open, toothless smile blossoms across the boy's face. It reaches all the way to his eyes, which narrow with joy. Jin sees that smile. He didn't expect it. Not anger, not tears, but a smile. Something happens to his own face. The muscles in his cheeks, accustomed to being rigid and uncontrollable, suddenly relax slightly. The corner of his stern, always pursed mouth twitches of its own accord. It's almost imperceptible, just a small spasm. But it's an attempt to respond. In his entire adult life, his face had never moved like that in response to someone's smile. He didn't plan it. It just happened. He doesn't smile back, no, but the tension in his jaw loosens. The sternness in his gaze melts, giving way to pure bewilderment. Who is this child? And why is he here? Under his desk, smiling at him like he's an old friend, Calvin, having received at least some reaction. And for him, a twitching cheek is a whole dialogue, gurgles happily. He makes a sound, boo-boo-ah, and slaps his hand on his knee. Jin stares at him silently for another moment. Then his gaze falls on the abandoned ashtray, then back to the child. The thought process is visible on his face. Child to ashtray to noise. He understands. He slowly extends his hand. Not to the child right away. He places his large, well-knuckled hand on the floor, palm up between them, like a bridge, like a proposal. Calvin looks at the hand. He leans forward, losing his balance, and uses both hands to support himself. He crawls closer to the large palm. He pokes it with his index finger, curiously. Then he grabs Jean's thumb and pulls it toward his mouth. Jean doesn't pull his hand away. He allows it. Then, very carefully, he moves his other hand under the baby. His movements are precise but hesitant. He's clearly never done this before. He places one hand under Calvin's bottom, the other under his back, and slowly, smoothly, he lifts him off the floor. Calvin lifts himself off the floor. He pauses for a moment, surprised by the new sensation of height. Then he sees the room from a new perspective, from above. His eyes widen. He forgets about Jean's finger in his mouth. Jin holds him at arm's length, slightly in front of him, like an incredibly fragile and precious object. He's surprised by how little he weighs. The child feels almost weightless, a warm bundle of life in his large, heavy-handed hands. He's so soft. His body arches defenselessly. Jean gently pulls him closer, supporting his head, and sits him down on his bent knee, still squatting. Now they're almost level, face to face. At this very moment, Naomi is polishing silver in the pantry. She hears a distant, muffled, yet unmistakably loud sound. A metallic thud. It's unmistakable. It's coming from the main wing of the house. Her heart sinks. That sound is coming from the study, or from the hallway next to it. She knows every sound in this house. This one is alien and unsettling. She throws down the rag. Her face turns ashen. A single thought, wild and incredible, pierces her mind. Calvin! No, it's impossible. He's with Mrs. Elsie. He's safe. But this thought has already taken root in horror. She practically runs down the hallway. Her feet, in soft slippers, carry her forward silently. She rounds the corner and sees the door to Mrs. Elsie's room. It's open. Naomi peers inside. Mrs. Elsie is asleep in a chair. A blanket with stars is spread out on the floor. A yellow giraffe is lying on it. The room is empty. Calvin is gone. An icy wave of fear overwhelms Naomi. She can't breathe. She rushes back out into the hallway and looks toward the office. The door is closed, but from behind the door, not a sound comes. This silence is more terrible than any scream. Naomi thinks about Jean, about his cold, impenetrable face, about his rules, about his anger, which she never saw, but always felt like a thunderous tension in the air. Her child, her little, defenseless Calvin, broke the most important rule. He is in the master's office. She rushes to the door. Her hand trembles as she reaches for the handle. She doesn't dare enter without knocking, but she can't knock. She needs to know what's there. She presses her ear to the dark wood. Nothing. She takes a step back, a deep breath, then she opens the door. She opens it abruptly, because she can't wait any longer, and she freezes on the threshold, her hand still on the doorknob. The sight that meets her eyes is so incredible that she can't process it. Jean squats on the floor in the middle of the office. Calvin, her son, sits in his large, strong arms, on his knee. He's babbling and reaching for Jean's face, trying to grab his nose. Jin doesn't pull away. He simply sits motionless, holding the child, looking at him with an expression of profound, bewildered bewilderment on his always stern face. Naomi stands in the doorway, unable to believe her eyes. She expected everything. A scream, a cold order to resign, a child throwing a tantrum, but not this. Her boss, Jean, is sitting on the floor in his perfect office. He's squatting, his posture a little awkward, as if he's unsure how to do it properly. But his hands hold Calvin firmly, yet gently. One palm completely supports his back, fingers gently cupping his ribs. The other hand supports him from below. Calvin sits on his bent leg, as if on a throne, babbling animatedly. Jin doesn't rock him. He doesn't smile. His face is a mask of extreme concentration. He looks at the baby as if he's trying to solve a complex puzzle or defuse a bomb. But there's no menace in this concentration. There's caution, as if he's afraid to make a wrong move and break something. Calvin seems to be feeling fine. He's tired of reaching for his nose, and now his attention is drawn to the shiny clasp on Jean's cuff. He taps it with his fist. Naomi can't move. She's afraid any movement will destroy this fragile, incredible world. She just watches. Jin notices her first. He looks up from the child and across the room at her. His gaze is still serious, but it lacks the usual detachment. It holds a question. He doesn't get up. He continues to sit on the floor with Calvin in his arms. Is this yours? Jin asks. His voice is quiet. He doesn't raise his voice. There's no anger in his voice. It sounds ordinary, and that makes it even stranger. Naomi nods, the words catching in her throat. She takes a step forward, then another. Yes, Mr. Kim, this is my son, Calvin. I'm sorry. I don't know how he got here. Jean looks at the boy again. Calvin, hearing his mother's familiar voice, turns his head and sees her. His face lights up with a new, even stronger smile. He reaches out to her. Calvin, Jean repeats. He says the name slowly, tasting it. How old is he? 8 months, Naomi answers quickly. She expects questions to follow. Where is the father? Why is the baby here? But Jean only nods again, as if he's just received important technical information. Naomi can't remain silent any longer. She must explain herself before she's driven away. The nanny, the woman who looks after him, she didn't come today. I took him to the neighbor, Mrs. Elsie. She lives in the outbuilding. He must have learned to crawl. Better than I thought. And, her voice breaks. She looks at her son in her boss's arms, and fear squeezes her throat. He probably crawled out. I didn't hear. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. She falls silent. She's prepared for anything. For a reprimand. For dismissal. She expects his face to darken, his brows to furrow, and he'll order her to put the child away immediately and clean up herself. Jean listens to her without interrupting. His gaze moves from her frightened face to Calvin's satisfied one, who has now found a new amusement, tugging at the collar of his t-shirt. Where are his things? Jin asks after a pause. The question is so unexpected that Naomi blinks. Things? A blanket, toys, whatever he needs, Jin clarifies, as if discussing the logistics of an important shipment. At Mrs. Elsie's. In the room, Naomi answers, not understanding. Jean climbs up carefully, gently, so as not to startle the child. He holds Calvin in his arms, and the boy, at a great height, grabs his shoulder. Bring them here, Jean says. His tone is not commanding, but businesslike. Naomi looks at him without moving. Here? To the office? She asks again. Sure, she's misheard. This way, Jean confirms. He turns slightly, looking around the room. His gaze stops on the far corner, to the right of the window. There's no draft from the door there, and the light from the window isn't direct, but diffused. There, and put something soft under the blanket. A rug. He doesn't ask if she agrees. He simply states the fact, as if it were the most sensible decision in the world. Naomi still doesn't believe it. She nods automatically and slips out of the office. Her feet carry her to Mrs. Elsie's room. Her mind is blank with shock. When Naomi returns, clutching a star print blanket, a yellow giraffe, a diaper bag, and a small throw, the scene is almost unchanged. Jean is standing at his desk. He's holding Calvin in his arms, but not quite as tensely. He simply stands there, while Calvin gazes out over the room with interest. There! Jin nods his head towards the chosen corner. Naomi goes there. She spreads a blanket on the floor and a quilt on top. She puts a toy on top. It becomes a small but cozy island. She looks around at Gina, asking with her eyes if everything is right. Jean approaches. He crouches again and carefully lowers Calvin onto the blanket. Calvin, finding himself on the familiar fabric, immediately rolls over onto his tummy and reaches for the giraffe. Jean stands up. He looks at this makeshift children's corner in his austere office. It looks strange. A foreign body. Keep him away from the table and the doors, he tells Naomi. His voice returns to its normal, even tone. And keep it quiet. He doesn't say or. He simply states the terms. And nodding, he goes to his chair. He sits down at the table, turns away from them, and turns on the computer. That's the end of the conversation. Naomi stands next to the blanket, still stunned. She looks at her son. He's perfectly safe. He's in Jean's own office. She doesn't know what to make of this. Is this a favor, or simply the most logical solution to the problem, so as not to interrupt the workday? She hears papers rustling behind her. Work continues. She has responsibilities too. She can't stand here all day. She leans over to Calvin, kisses his head, and whispers, "Just sit here quietly, do you hear? Mom's here." Then she leaves the office, leaving the door ajar. She needs to finish polishing the silver. Every 5 minutes, she creeps up to the door and peers inside. Calvin is playing with the giraffe. He's sitting on a blanket, mumbling something. Jean is sitting at the table, staring at the computer screen. They don't look at each other. They simply exist in the same space. This is the strangest work shift of her life. Her main responsibility now is not only cleanliness, but also the peaceful existence of her son, 20 meters away from the boss. An hour passes. Naomi is almost finished in the kitchen. She approaches the office door again. Jin is talking on the phone. His voice is low and businesslike. He speaks Korean. He discusses figures, deadlines, deliveries. His face is focused. But Naomi notices one detail. He's not sitting upright, as usual, but with his chair slightly angled, so that he can see Calvin's corner out of the corner of his eye, and every few minutes, his gaze, gliding past his interlocutor in the window or over the papers on the desk, involuntarily drifts there, to the colorful blanket. Calvin was tired of the giraffe. He crawled across the blanket to its edge. He reached the edge of the blanket and reached his hand out to touch the cold wood of the parquet. No! Jin's voice comes firmly, still in Korean, but the word sounds the same in any language. Calvin stops and looks at him. Jin isn't looking directly at him. He's still talking into the phone, but his hand, holding the pen, makes a short, jerky gesture of back. Calvin, intrigued, sits up and looks at the pen. Jin ends the call and hangs up. He looks at the baby. Calvin looks at him. They just look at each other again. Then Calvin makes a bored noise and flops down on his butt. After another half hour, Calvin gets bored. He starts to act up, quietly at first, then louder. He doesn't cry, but he whines and whines, demanding attention. He abandons the giraffe and crawls to the edge of the blanket. He wants to explore further. Naomi, hearing this from the hallway, freezes in horror. She's about to run in and get him, but stops. Jin puts the papers down. He looks at the whining child. His expression doesn't reflect irritation, but rather practical puzzlement. There's a problem, and it needs to be solved. He looks around his desk. There are no toys here. His gaze falls on the pen. Expensive, heavy, made of dark metal, with a lacquered finish. He uses it every day. It's just a tool. He takes it. Then he stands up and walks over to the blanket. He doesn't sit next to him. He stands over Calvin and holds out the pen to him, holding it by the cap. Calvin stops whining. His eyes light up. A shiny new thing! He grabs it with both hands. The handle is heavy, almost like that ashtray. It's cool and smooth. Jin lets go of it. Calvin immediately tries to put it in his mouth. He works hard at it, licking the metal. Then he starts tapping it on the floor. A dull, soft thud. Jin watches as his prized possession becomes a child's toy. He says nothing. He simply returns to his desk and sits down to work again. Now, in addition to the creaking of the chair and the rustling of papers, a steady, methodical tapping can be heard in the office. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking gradually becomes less frequent. Calvin's strength is waning. The morning full of adventures is taking its toll. He sits, bent over the pen, which now rests on his lap. His eyelids are growing heavy. He nods off several times. Then he slowly falls onto his side, right onto the soft blanket. He lies there, clutching Jin's shiny hand to his chest. His breathing becomes deep and even. He is asleep. The silence in the office is absolute again. But now it's different. It's filled with that quiet, serene breathing. Jin looks up from the report. He sees the sleeping child. He stares at him for a long moment. Then his gaze falls on his hand, which Calvin clutches tightly in his fist. That same subtle movement appears on Jin's lips again, almost a smile, but not quite, more like a look of surprise. He quietly gets up and approaches the door. Naomi immediately appears in the doorway, her eyes full of worry. "He's sleeping," Jin says quietly, stepping back so she can look. Naomi sees her sleeping son, hugging someone else's treasured possession. Her heart skips a beat, filled with both tenderness and fear. "I'll take her," she whispers, taking a step inside. "Don't touch him." Jin stops her just as quietly. "Let him sleep." He returns to his desk, leaving her standing in the doorway. He sits down and looks out the window, not at the sleeping child, but his shoulders are no longer so tense. And in the room where order and cold determination had always reigned, there is now something new, something warm, defenseless, and sleeping peacefully on the floor in the rays of the afternoon sun. Calvin sleeps for almost an hour. During this time, Naomi manages to finish all her urgent tasks. She stands in the hallway, listening to the silence coming from the office. She hesitates to enter. Finally, she hears a faint groan. Calvin wakes up. She goes in to change him. Jin is talking on the phone, his voice quiet but firm. Naomi does everything quickly and carefully, trying not to make any noise. She places the refreshed, contented Calvin back on the blanket and gives him his giraffe. She gets ready to leave. "Naomi!" She turns around. Jin has hung up. He looks at her. His face doesn't express anything special. "His father?" he asks. The question is quiet, without pressure. Just a question. Naomi freezes. She didn't expect this. She looks at the floor. Her throat tightens. He's not here, she finally says. Her voice is hollow. She adds nothing more. She explains nothing. She makes no excuses. It's just a fact. She waits for more, perhaps condemnation, or conversely, pity. None of this follows. Gene stares at her for a few seconds. Then his gaze shifts to Calvin, who's busily trying to stuff 2 legs into the giraffe's mouth at once. He sees the boy's blonde curls, his dark skin, his concentrated face. He sees Naomi, alone, working from dawn to dusk in his house. He puts these facts together. The picture is simple and clear. He doesn't ask anything else. He doesn't nod. He doesn't say, I understand. He simply looks back down at his papers. But there was no contempt or curiosity in his gaze as he looked at her. There was something else, something like a guarded respect for the difficult situation she was dealing with alone, silently. For Jean, actions speak louder than words. She's here. She's working. The child is here and quiet. That's enough. The rest is none of his business. Naomi exhales. She feels a weight lifted from her soul. She quietly leaves the office. She's no longer afraid. There's some strange silent agreement now. The next morning, Naomi wakes up again before dawn. She gets ready for work again. But today her heart is lighter. She still takes Calvin to Mrs. Elsie. But today she says to her, please make sure the door to our corridor is closed. He's gotten very fast. She kisses her son and leaves. He spent the whole day yesterday in his office, and nothing terrible happened. On the contrary. But she can't count on it happening again. She begins work. A couple of hours later, she hears a familiar sound. Mrs. Elsie's quick, frightened footsteps in the hallway. Naomi! He's back! I turned away for a second. The old woman is terrified. Naomi isn't scared anymore. She's almost sure where he's headed. She goes to Jean's office. The door is tightly closed today. She knocks. Quietly. Come in. She opens the door. Jean is already at his desk. He looks at her over the monitor. He crawled away again, Naomi says quietly, feeling stupid. Jin looks at her. Then his gaze moves to the empty corner where the blanket lay yesterday. The blanket and throw are still there, neatly folded after yesterday's cleaning. He nods slowly towards the corner. Just one nod. Not a word. Naomi understands. She goes and spreads out a blanket and a quilt. Then she goes out and returns a minute later with Calvin in her arms. The boy is already smiling, seeing the familiar room. She lays him down on the blanket. He immediately crawls to the place where he found the ashtray yesterday. But it's not there. The floor under the table is spotless. I'm working, Jean says, sounding less like a complaint and more like a statement of fact. He dives back into his paperwork. Naomi exits. History repeats itself. But today, it's not an accident. It's almost routine. On the 3rd day, everything changes. Naomi simply doesn't take Calvin to Mrs. Elsie's. After breakfast, she takes him by the hand, he's already trying to get up, and leads him straight to Jean's office. She knocks. Come in. She enters. Jean looks at her, then at the child. Mrs. Elsie can't look after him today, Naomi says. It's not entirely true, but she doesn't want her son to frighten the old woman again by running away. And, surprisingly, she doesn't want to disrupt what's begun to take shape here. Jin looks at them. Then he simply nods toward the corner again. This is no longer permission. This is expectation. Naomi spreads out the blanket. She sits Calvin down and places his toys in front of him. She's no longer in such a hurry to leave. She stands for a moment, watching as her son immediately begins exploring the edge of the blanket. Jin isn't looking at them. He's drinking coffee and reading something on his tablet. He's not sitting upright, though, but slightly turned away. There's no tension in his posture. He's simply waiting for his little guest to get comfortable and begin his day. It becomes a ritual, a morning one. Naomi brings Calvin in. Jean nods. Calvin takes his corner. The office becomes a place where 3 people live and work at once, not just one. The week passes quietly. Calvin has settled in. His corner has acquired another toy, a soft cube that Naomi brought from home. He's crawling well and even tries to stand up, holding onto the wall. One morning, Jean looks up from his work. He looks at the child. Calvin is sitting and concentrating on trying to put a large plastic pyramid ring on his head like a hat. He can't do it. The ring slips off. Jean watches. His expression is involuntary. He doesn't smile, but his eyes follow the action. He sees Calvin frown after his 5th failed attempt. The boy looks at the ring with such a serious, insulted expression, as if the ring itself had deceived him. This expression of childish indignation strikes Jin as incredibly funny. The corners of his lips twitch again, this time more forcefully. Almost a smile. Calvin looks up and sees this strange expression on the big man's face. A furrowed brow, raised eyebrows, twisted lips. For Calvin, it's a new comical grimace. And he laughs. Not a gurgle, not a chuckle, but a real, pure, ringing laugh. Ha ha ha! The sound fills the quiet room, like the ringing of little bells. Jean freezes. The sound takes him by surprise. He's heard Calvin babbling, whining, even screaming in outrage. But the laughter is directed at him. The child is laughing at him. And surprisingly, Jin doesn't feel annoyed. He feels something else. Mild embarrassment, mixed with surprise. His awkward, almost casual smile had provoked such a strong reaction. He looks at Calvin, who is laughing, and to somehow respond, he tries to repeat the grimace again. His forehead wrinkles even more. Calvin laughs even harder, falling on his back, laughing and kicking his legs in the air. Jin turns back to his desk, as if he's embarrassed, but his shoulders tremble slightly, not from laughter, but from some inner, unfamiliar feeling. He picks up his pen, but doesn't write. He simply holds it, listening as the children's laughter fades behind him, turning to contented murmurs. The next day, something strange happens. Jean has a meeting. One of his assistants, a young man in a formal suit, enters the office. He's carrying not a folder of documents, but a large cardboard box. He places it carefully on the floor next to his desk. "That's all you asked for," the assistant says. He casts a quick, puzzled glance at the children's corner, where Calvin is fiddling with blocks. He doesn't ask any questions. "Okay, you're free," says Jean. The assistant leaves. Jeannie waits for the door to close. Then he gets up and goes to the box. He opens it. There's no paper inside. There are toys, but not ordinary ones. These are educational toys made of natural wood, a shape sorter with different shapes, a wooden car on a string, a set of large multicolored cups that can be nested. Everything is high quality, expensive, without any small parts. Jean takes out the sorter. He looks at it as if it were some strange mechanism. Then he carries it to the children's corner. Calvin immediately drops his old toys. His eyes light up at the sight of a new, bright object. Jean places the sorter in front of him. He squats down next to it, something he's never done before. He picks up one of the figures, a yellow star, and demonstrates how it fits into the corresponding slot. He does this silently, only by action. Calvin watches, mesmerized. Then he grabs another piece, a triangle, and tries to fit it into the star hole. It doesn't work. He tries harder. Jean doesn't help. He just watches. Then he takes the triangle from Calvin's hands and slowly, demonstratively, inserts it into the correct place. Calvin watches, eyes wide. Then he claps his hands in delight. Jin gets up and returns to his desk. He's no longer suitable. But he bought these toys, secretly, through his assistant, for his maid's child. Because the old giraffe and the cube are apparently no longer suitable. A few more days pass. Naomi no longer worries in the mornings. She feeds Calvin, dresses him, and leads him into the office. Now she doesn't even knock. She simply walks in first, says hello, and Jean, without looking up from the screen, throws back a quick "good morning," seemingly addressed to both of them. She spreads out the blanket. Calvin is already fidgeting impatiently on her arm. He recognizes this place. He likes it here. One such morning, Naomi is just about to put him down when Calvin suddenly reaches forward. Not toward the toys. He reaches out toward Jean, toward the big man at the big table. He babbles, clearly wanting to be there, not on the floor. Naomi freezes. She doesn't know what to do. Jean looks up. He sees small hands outstretched toward him. He stares at them for a second, then slowly pushes his chair back and stands. He approaches. He doesn't pick Calvin up, but he extends his index finger toward him. Calvin immediately grabs the finger with both hands and pulls it to his mouth to try it. "No," Jean says calmly. He doesn't pull his finger away, but tightens it slightly so the child can't put it in his mouth. "It's dirty." Calvin frowns, but doesn't let go of his finger. He just holds on to it like an anchor. Naomi watches this scene, and a warm, calm feeling blossoms in her chest. Not fear, not apprehension, but trust. She trusts this stern, silent man with her son. And her son, the most honest creature in the world, already trusts him, reaches out to him. She slowly lowers Calvin onto the blanket, and he finally lets go of Jean's finger. Jean looks at his hand, then at the baby. "He's active today," he tells Naomi, as if he's giving an important report. "Yes," she smiles. "He got enough sleep." Jean nods, taking this information into account. Then he returns to his desk. Naomi goes out to begin work. For the first time in a long time, she feels truly calm. Her child is not just safe. He is where, it seems. He is even welcomed. The workday is drawing to a close. The sun is no longer so bright, It's light falling on the office floor in long orange stripes. Calvin is tired. He no longer plays with wooden sorter and sits surrounded by multicolored cups, quietly muttering something under his breath. Naomi has finished her chores. She stands in the doorway, hesitant to enter and break the silence. She sees Jean push the keyboard away from him. He looks at the child in the corner. Then his gaze shifts to Naomi. "You can stay late today," he says quietly. It's not an order, more like permission, or even a suggestion. Naomi nods and cautiously enters. She sits on the floor next to her son, leaning her back against the wall. She's tired. It's nice to just sit. Jin gets up from the table. He doesn't go to them. He goes to the window and looks at the sunset. Then, looking out the window, not at them, he begins to speak. His voice is low and even. "Once upon a time there was a tiger," Jin begins. "He was very strong and lived alone in a large forest." Calvin stops mumbling. He turns his head toward the voice. His eyes are wide. "Everyone was afraid of him," Jin continues. He speaks slowly, choosing simple words. "Because he roared loudly, and he walked alone. But one day, the tiger found a little chick that had fallen out of the nest." Naomi listens, surprised. She's never heard Jean say anything unrelated to work, and certainly not fairy tales. "The chick wasn't afraid of the tiger," Jean says. He turns and looks at Calvin. "He looked at him and squeaked." The tiger didn't know what to do. He could have gotten away, but he didn't. Calvin sits motionless, absorbing every word. Though he hardly understands the meaning, he is mesmerized by the rhythm and timbre of the voice. "The tiger lay down next to the chick and warmed it, and in the morning he carried it back to the nest." The genie finishes the story. He doesn't add a moral. He simply finishes. That's it. He looks out the window again. The story is short and simple, but after it, a special warm silence hangs in the room. Calvin finally blinks. He makes a sound, "Ta-ta," as if asking, "So what happened next?" Jin turns around. He sees the child's expectant face. The corners of his lips twitch. "That's it," he repeats. "End of story. Time to sleep." Naomi smiles. She feels a gratitude she can't express in words. She picks up a sleepy Calvin. "Thank you, Mr. Kim," she says quietly. Jean simply nods, returning to his desk as if he'd just been discussing the weather. But that evening, that brief tale of the tiger and the chick, will forever remain in Naomi's memory as a moment of pure, unexpected humanity. Another week passes. Calvin is teething. He's more fussy, waking up frequently during the night. After lunch, in the middle of Jean's workday, the little one, having played enough, simply falls asleep right on the blanket, his face buried in the stuffed teddy bear Jean recently added to the collection. His assistant brought it in an opaque bag. Naomi pops into the study to pick up her son for his afternoon walk. She sees that he's asleep. She doesn't want to wake him. She quietly approaches, carefully picks him up, and carries him to their room. At that moment, Jin ends the phone call. He sees her. He sees the sleeping child. He raises his hand, gesturing for her to stop. "Don't wake me," he whispers. He gets up himself. He approaches the sleeping Calvin. He looks at him as if assessing the task. Then he crouches. His movements, as always, are precise and deliberate. He carefully slides one hand under the child's head and shoulders, the other under his bottom and legs. He does this slowly, trying not to disturb his sleep. His face regains the concentrated expression it had on the first day. He lifts Calvin. The boy frowns in his sleep, muttering something, but doesn't wake up. He turns over and presses his cheek against Jean's chest, burying his nose in the fabric of his shirt. Jean freezes. He stands in the middle of the office, holding the sleeping child in his arms. He doesn't know what to do next. He looks at Naomi. Naomi understands. She comes closer and says softly, "I'll take him to his crib." Jean nods. He takes a step toward her, then another. He doesn't hand over the child like one would pass an object. He holds him out to Naomi himself, allowing her to take him while he still supports him. It's an awkward, dance-like gesture, full of caution. Finally, Calvin is in his mother's safe arms. Jean steps back, his hands falling to his sides. A small wet spot from the baby's drool remains on his dark shirt. He looks at it, then at Naomi. "He's sleeping soundly," he says, as if this is an important report. "Yes," Naomi smiles. "Thank you." She leaves, carrying her son. Jin stands in the middle of the room for a moment, staring at the empty blanket. Then he slowly returns to his desk. He doesn't wipe the stain on his shirt. Meetings sometimes happen at Jin's house. Not often, but they do happen. They usually take place in the living room. But today, a new potential partner came to see him, a man with a loud voice and a brusque manner. And for some reason, Jin asked him to come into the study. Naomi, hearing a loud, unfamiliar voice in the hallway, became alarmed. She approached the slightly open office door. She saw that Calvin, tired from his morning games, had fallen asleep again, curled up in his corner. The genie and the guest are sitting at the table. The guest does most of the talking. He speaks loudly, slapping his hand on the table for emphasis, his voice harsh and piercing. He talks about money, risks, and profit. His voice cuts through the silence. Calvin jerks in his sleep. His face wrinkles. He tosses and turns, but doesn't wake up. Jin listens silently, his face unreadable. Then, just as the guest raises his voice to make yet another important point, Jin makes a move. He doesn't say quieter. He simply raises his hand, a sharp, demanding gesture that halts the conversation. The guest falls silent, surprised. Jin doesn't look at him. He looks into the corner of the room. He points his finger there. Then he brings his index finger to his lips. The classic hush gesture. His eyes stare steadily at his guest. The guest turns around. He notices the children's corner for the first time. He sees a sleeping child. His haughty face expresses first bewilderment, then annoyance. "Sorry, I didn't know," he begins, lowering his voice to a creaky whisper. Jean doesn't answer. He simply waits for his guest to calm down. Then he nods, allowing him to continue. The rest of the conversation is almost whispered. The guest looks tense and uncomfortable. Jin, as always, is calm and collected. When the meeting ended and the guest left, Naomi, standing outside the door, felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't a show of concern. It was something deeper, a principle. In his house, in his space, there were rules. And one of the new rules was silence when the baby was sleeping. No loud business conversation was worth breaking this rule. It was a protection. Wordless, but absolutely clear. Jean's office has become a strange hybrid. On the one hand, it's still the same command center. Important calls are taken here, contracts are filed here, and the atmosphere of serious decisions permeates the air. The desk is still perfectly tidy, and the filing cabinets are lined with files. On the other hand, a child now lives here. A bright blanket lies in the corner. Wooden toys are scattered about. Sometimes you'll find a plastic car rolled under the table. The air sometimes smells not only of coffee and leather, but also of baby powder. These two worlds exist in parallel, almost without intersecting, but no longer interfering with each other. Jean might be discussing a complex financial matter on the phone, while Calvin loudly bangs a hammer from a toy set, a gift from an assistant who now carries out strange errands without question. Jean doesn't ask him to stop. He simply speaks a little louder into the phone. Naomi, cleaning her office in the evening, dusts the expensive figurines while simultaneously packing away the building blocks. She vacuums the carpet next to her desk chair and wipes away the marks left by small, sticky fingers on the glass surface of her low table. Sometimes, when Jean is deep in thought, looking out the window, his thoughts are interrupted by a soft babble. He turns around and sees Calvin, holding onto the wall, taking his first tentative steps along it, his tongue lolling out in earnest from the effort. Jean doesn't approach or help. He simply watches. And when Calvin finally reaches the corner of the couch and collapses triumphantly onto his butt, Jean nods with satisfaction and returns to his thoughts. This coexistence became natural. The house grew larger. It became more than just a place for a child. It became a place for a life that wasn't bound by schedules or contracts, yet somehow had a right to exist. One evening, everything turned out differently. Naomi had a headache, a severe one. She could barely stand. She came to pick up Calvin in his office, pale, and Jean noticed it immediately. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, looking up from his papers. "Migraine," Naomi said simply, pressing her palm to her temple. "Sorry, I'll take him and go to bed." She bent down to pick up Calvin, but the world swam before her eyes. She staggered. Jin stood up quickly. He didn't support her, but his hand instinctively reached forward. "Sit down," he said firmly, pointing to the sofa by the wall. Naomi sat down on the sofa without arguing. She felt unwell. Jean looked at her, then at Calvin, who, sensing the tension, began to whine. Normally, in a situation like this, Jean would have called someone, or simply ignored them, leaving people to deal with their own problems. But that wasn't working now. He walked up to Calvin and picked him up. The boy calmed down, burying his face in his neck. "Lie down," Jean said to Naomi. "I'll sit with him." He didn't ask. He stated. He sat Calvin down on the floor next to him and picked up a book. Not a business book, a regular picture book he'd brought over once. Again, through an assistant. He opened it and began showing the pictures, naming the objects in a flat, monotone voice. Car, dog, house. Naomi lay with her eyes closed, listening to that voice, to Jean's even, calm murmur, and her son's contented babble. The pain slowly receded, not just because of the darkness and peace, but because of the feeling that she wasn't alone, that someone cared about them. An hour later, she felt much better. She opened her eyes. The sight she saw touched her deeply. Jean sat on the floor, leaning his back against the sofa. He wasn't asleep, but his eyes were closed. His head was slightly tilted back, and on his chest, sprawled out like a little kitten, slept Calvin. One of the baby's arms was resting on Jean's shirt, the other clutching the hem of his jacket. Jean unconsciously supported the baby's back with one hand, even in his sleep. In this quiet room, in the light of the table lamp, they looked like a family. That unplanned, strange, silent family that had formed spontaneously from the fragments of 3 lonely lives. Naomi didn't move. She was afraid to disturb this moment. And in that moment, she realized what Jean had perhaps already realized long ago. He no longer simply tolerated the child's presence. He didn't simply fulfill some strange duty. This presence had become important to him. The silence in his house, that absolute, controlled silence he so treasured, would now seem empty and lifeless. His study, without the babble, without the clacking of wooden blocks, without that quiet snore in the corner, would be just a room. And so it was a place where life lived, where he was expected, not for business, just like that. He opened his eyes. They met Naomi's. He didn't flinch or change his position. He simply nodded to her, carefully, so as not to wake the child. "Better?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she answered just as quietly. "Thank you." He nodded again. Then he rose carefully, still holding the sleeping Calvin. He walked over and handed him to Naomi. This time the gesture was more confident, more fluid. "Go and rest," he said. "You don't have to start early tomorrow." He said this not as a kind host, but as someone simply concerned with logistics. For everything to run smoothly, the maid needed to be healthy. But Naomi saw more. She saw the way he looked at her son's sleeping face as he handed him over to her. His gaze lacked the usual sternness. There was something calm and familiar there. She left, carrying her son. Jean was left alone in his office. He walked over to his chair but didn't sit down. He looked at the empty corner, at the scattered toys. Then he looked at the quiet, dark house outside the window. This silence had once been his ally. Now it seemed a little alien. He'd grown accustomed to a different background sound, to a different daily rhythm. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door open. For the first time, in a house where all doors were always closed, this one now remained open, as an invitation, as a sign that this room was no longer just his fortress. It had become a shared space, a place where his heart, without planning it, had found a new, very noisy and warm haven. Naomi goes to her room, carrying the sleeping Calvin. The headache has subsided, but her heart is full. Tonight has changed everything. She understands this as she lies in the darkness, listening to her son's even breathing. Jean didn't just help. He took on responsibility, if only for an hour. He became part of their little world. The next morning, she wakes up slightly embarrassed. It's embarrassing that her boss saw her like this. She feeds Calvin, dresses him, and slowly walks to the office. The door is ajar. She peers inside. Jin is already at the table. His face has the usual work-related focus. He's looking at the screen. There's a blanket in the corner. Next to it stands a new box. A large, flat one. Naomi enters. "Good morning, Mr. Kim," she says quietly. He looks up and nods. "Good morning." His gaze shifts to Calvin. "How are you feeling?" The question is businesslike, but she hears a hint of yesterday in it. "Okay, thank you." The headache has cleared up. He nods again, satisfied with the answer. "This is for him." Jin points his chin at the box in the corner. "Open it." Naomi comes over. She opens the box. Inside is a playmat. It's soft, with arches on which various toys hang, a mirror, rattles, teethers. It's the perfect place for a baby, who's already rolling over and will soon start crawling. It's a thoughtful, expensive item. She looks at Jean. He avoids her gaze, staring at the monitor again. "So he doesn't crawl around where he shouldn't," he explains dryly. "And so it's more comfortable." Naomi understands. This isn't just a gift. It's equipment for safety and efficiency, so that his new little charge doesn't distract him from his work even more. At least, that's how he explains it to himself. "Thank you," she says, her voice trembling with genuine gratitude. "That's very practical." He grunts in response, which seems to mean, of course. Naomi lays out the mat. Calvin, seeing the bright colors and hanging toys, lets out a delighted squeal and immediately reaches for the mirror. He's happy. The workday begins as usual, but there are changes. Calvin now has his own official workspace. It's better equipped than most adults. Gene starts taking calls, but today he does it differently. Before, he'd just talk, ignoring the babble in the corner. Now, before answering, he sometimes pauses briefly, especially if Calvin is babbling loudly. He doesn't tell him to shut up. He simply waits for him to calm down before speaking. It's almost imperceptible. But Naomi, cleaning the hallway, hears it. He adapts his work rhythm to the child's. In the middle of the day, an assistant arrives with documents. He's already accustomed to the sight of the children's corner. He places the folder on the table and is about to leave. Jin stops him. Order lunch. For 3. My usual, and something, baby food, puree, fruit, and juice, Jean says, not looking at him, looking through the papers. The assistant pauses for a second. For 3, that includes the maid and the child. It's not a request, it's an order, but the content of the order is unprecedented. Yes, sir, the assistant quickly answers and leaves, trying not to look into the corner. Naomi hears this from the hallway. She doesn't know how to react. She can't refuse. It would be impolite and strange, but agreeing, it's too personal. An hour later, lunch arrives. On beautiful trays, one with Korean food for Jin, another with soup and salad for Naomi, and a small plate of baby food and a cup of juice. Jean gets up from the table. Sit down, he says to Naomi, pointing to the sofa. Dinner. He walks up to Calvin himself. He takes the bowl of puree and sits down on the floor next to the rug. He looks at the spoon, then at the baby. He's clearly never done this before. Give it to him, he tells Naomi, but there's no irritation in his tone. There's practical interest. Naomi sits down next to him. She picks up a spoon. Like this, she says, demonstrating. Calvin opens his mouth like a baby bird. Jean watches. He doesn't help. He simply observes the process. Then, as Naomi bends down to wipe the puree from her son's chin, Jean slowly reaches out and takes the spoon. He scoops up some of the puree. His movements are precise but hesitant. He brings the spoon to Calvin's mouth. Calvin looks at him, then at the spoon, and opens his mouth. Jean carefully spoons the puree into his mouth. It works. The corners of his lips twitch again in a near smile. The 3 of them finish lunch together, silently. But it's not an awkward silence. It's a calm, shared meal. Jean eats her lunch at the table, Naomi on the couch, and Calvin finishes his mashed potatoes on the floor, watched by both of them. After lunch, Jean returns to work. But now he's sometimes distracted, not just by looking at something, but by something else. Calvin, trying to reach a toy on a ledge, rolls onto his side and can't get back up. He starts grunting. Jin stands up, walks over, and with one precise movement, flips him back onto his back. Then he returns to the table, still musing. A week passes. The office takes on a new, strange life. Naomi notices that Jean has started leaving things on his desk that might interest Calvin, harmless ones. A heavy glass paperweight in the shape of a ball, a beautiful but sturdy wooden ruler. He places them on the edge, as if by accident. But when Calvin, who has now learned to crawl quite quickly, crawls up to the desk and looks at the ball with interest, Jean doesn't remove it. He picks it up and carefully rolls it across the floor toward the child. Calvin chases after it with delight. One evening, Naomi stays late to iron the curtains in the study. Calvin is already asleep in his crib in their room. Jean is working late. Suddenly, he pushes back his chair and says, looking out the window, his birthday is coming soon. Naomi freezes with the iron in her hand. Yes, in 3 weeks. How many years? Asks Jean. He is still looking out the window. A year. Jean nods. He says nothing, but a few days later, the assistant brings into the office not a box, but an envelope. Jean puts it on the table and looks at it. That evening, when Naomi comes to pick up Calvin's toys to put them away in a corner, Jean stops her. Wait! He takes the envelope and hands it to her. For his birthday. To buy him what he needs. There's money in the envelope. Not a huge amount, but significant. More than her weekly salary. This isn't a handout. It's a payment. A 1-year-old needs a lot of things. Clothes, shoes, maybe a new stroller. Naomi can't accept this. She tries to hand the envelope back. Mr. Kim, I can't. It's not for you, he interrupts, his voice growing firmer. It's for him. You're his mother. You decide what he needs. Just buy it. He says it as if he were giving a business order, impartially but insistently. She understands that arguing is pointless, and she understands the subtext. He doesn't want to give her a toy she might not like. He trusts her to choose the best. This is the highest form of respect. Thank you, she says quietly, clutching the envelope in her hand. Thank you very much. He nods and returns to his papers, closing the subject. On the eve of her birthday, Naomi decides to bake a small cake, a simple sponge cake. She does it in the kitchen that evening. Calvin sits in his high chair and watches. Gene passes by on some errand of his own. He stops in the kitchen doorway and watches. Cake? He asks. Yes, for tomorrow. A very small one, Naomi explains sheepishly. He watches her actions, then at Calvin's intrigued expression. Then he leaves. But half an hour later, he returns. He's holding a small box. He places it on the table next to Naomi. Candles, he says. You need to blow out the candles. That's how it's supposed to be. There are #1 candles in the box, and regular thin-colored candles. Naomi looks at them, then at him. She doesn't know what to say. He's taken everything into account, even tradition. You'll join us tomorrow? For a little while? She asks timidly. To help blow out the candles. Jin looks at her, then at the box. His face is expressionless. We'll see about work, he says neutrally and leaves. But the next morning, when Naomi brings Calvin into his office, she sees a small cake on a plate on his desk, next to some paperwork. A box of candles lies nearby. Jean is sitting at the desk, as if waiting. She smiles. She comes over and places Calvin on the table, carefully, away from the edge. She inserts a candle into the cake and lights it. Happy birthday, she says quietly to her son. Calvin looks at the light, mesmerized. Jean stands up. He walks over to the table. He looks at the candle, then at the baby. You need to blow it out, he says to Calvin. Like this. He pretends to blow. Calvin looks at him, then at the candle. He drools, but doesn't blow. Jean looks at Naomi. Then he leans over the candle and quietly, with a single movement of his lips, blows it out. Smoke rises into the air. Calvin claps his hands, even though he doesn't understand what happened. Jean takes a knife, wooden, safety from the kitchen, and cuts a small piece of cake. He places it on a napkin and slides it toward Naomi, for Calvin. Then he cuts another, slightly larger one, and places it next to him, for himself, presumably. He doesn't eat it. He simply watches as Naomi tries to feed a crumb to her son, and as he winces at the new taste. The ceremony lasts 5 minutes. Then Jean sits back in his chair, pushes the cake aside, and gets down to work. The birthday is over. The workday continues. But for Naomi, those 5 minutes were an eternity of happiness. Her son celebrated his first birthday, and he didn't do it just anywhere. In the office of the man who became more than just their boss, who became a part of their lives. A silent, strange, but real part. She carries Calvin and the cake away. The office becomes quiet again. Jean sits alone. He stares at the napkin with the half-eaten piece of cake on the edge of the table. He picks it up and slowly eats the piece. Then he wipes his fingers, throws the napkin away, and opens the folder with the contract. Everything is as usual, only now this silence has a sweet aftertaste. And he realizes he likes this aftertaste much more than the emptiness that was before. He is no longer simply the master of this house. He has become something more, and he doesn't seem to mind this new, unplanned status.